October 26, 1943. 22:30 hours, the British Embassy, Ankara, Turkey. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic, heavy ticking of a grandfather clock and the distant, muffled sound of a piano being played in the drawing room downstairs. The melody was Beethoven. The pianist was Sir Hugh Knatchbull Hugeson, His Majesty's ambassador to the Republic of Turkey. Upstairs, in the ambassador's private bedroom, a man was sweating. His name was Elyesa Bazna. He was 39 years old, an Albanian by birth, a Turkish citizen by circumstance, and a valet by trade. He was short, balding, with a thick chest and heavy-lidded eyes that gave him an expression of perpetual, sleepy boredom. But he was not bored now. He was terrified. In his hands, he held a red leather dispatch box. It was emblazoned with the royal crest of the United Kingdom. Inside this box lay the most sensitive diplomatic and military secrets of the Allied war effort. Bazna knew the ambassador's routine perfectly. Sir Hugh was a man of culture and habit. Every night, before retiring, he would play the piano for exactly 45 minutes. During those 45 minutes, he was lost in the music. He would not hear the creak of a floorboard. He would not hear the click of a lock. Bazna pulled a wax impression from his pocket. He had made it days earlier, stealing the key from the ambassador's nightstand while Sir Hugh was in the bath. From that impression, he had fashioned a duplicate key. He inserted the key into the red box. It turned with a soft, metallic slide. The lid opened. Inside were documents stamped "Most Secret" and for eyes of ambassador only. Telegrams from the Foreign Office in London, minutes from War Cabinet meetings, summaries of conferences between Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. Bazna did not read them. He did not have time. He pulled a Leica 3 camera from his jacket pocket. He had built a crude wooden stand to hold the camera steady. He placed the documents on a chair under the glare of a high-wattage lamp he had dragged into the room. Click, wind, click, wind, click, wind. He worked with the frantic precision of a man dismantling a bomb. He photographed 52 documents. Every time the piano music downstairs paused between movements, Bazna froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. When the music resumed, he resumed. At 23:15, the piano stopped. Bazna shoved the papers back into the box. He locked it. He returned the box to the nightstand. He folded the camera stand and hid it under the bed. He slipped out of the room and dissolved into the shadows of the embassy corridor just as the ambassador's footsteps echoed on the stairs. Elyesa Bazna had just committed the greatest security breach in the history of the British Foreign Office, but he was not doing it for ideology. He was not a Nazi. He was not a communist. He hated the British, yes, but mostly because he found them arrogant. He was doing it for money. He wanted to be a rich man. He wanted to build an opera house. He wanted respect. He did not know that he was about to become the central figure in a tragedy of errors, a story where the greatest intelligence coup of World War II would be nullified by the paranoia of the Third Reich and paid for with the proceeds of the greatest financial crime in history. To understand the Cicero affair, one must first understand the city of Ankara in 1943. It was a nest of vipers. Turkey was neutral, walking a tightrope between the Allies and the Axis. Ankara was the only place in the world where British, American, German, Soviet, and Japanese diplomats lived side by side. They went to the same restaurants. They drank at the same nightclubs. They spied on each other with obsessive intensity. The German ambassador was Franz von Papen, a former chancellor of Germany, a wily aristocratic survivor who had helped Hitler rise to power and then been sidelined. He was a man of the old-school, arrogant, sophisticated, and deeply suspicious of the fanatics in Berlin. The German intelligence station in Ankara was a mess. It was divided between the Abwehr military intelligence and the SD, the intelligence service of the SS. They hated each other more than they hated the British. Into this toxic environment walked Elyesa Bazna. On the night of October 26th, after photographing the documents, Bazna went to the home of Ludwig Moisisch. Moisisch was an Austrian, a commercially minded attaché at the German embassy, but in reality, he was the chief of the SD in Ankara. Bazna did not tell Moisisch his name. He simply introduced himself as Pierre. He offered a roll of film. "I have photographs of the British ambassador's private documents," Bazna said. "I want 20,000 for this roll." and 15,000 for every roll after that. Moises stared at him. 20,000 was a fortune. In 1943, that was equivalent to nearly 1 million today. It was an absurd demand. "Who are you?" Moises asked. "That is not your concern," Bazna replied. "Develop the film. If you like what you see, pay me. If not, I vanish." Moises was skeptical. He assumed this was a trap. The British were masters of deception. They had just fooled the world with Operation Mincemeat, planting fake documents on a corpse to cover the invasion of Sicily. Moises feared this was another game, but he developed the film. As the images appeared in the darkroom tray, Moises's skepticism turned to shock. The photographs were clear. The letterheads were authentic. The content was explosive. There were telegrams discussing the upcoming Tehran Conference. There were reports on Allied air bases in Turkey. There were details about the shipment of Lend-Lease material to the Soviet Union. Moises ran to Ambassador von Papen. Papen looked at the documents. He recognized the handwriting of his British counterpart. He knew the style of the Foreign Office telegrams. "This is genuine," Papen whispered. They sent a priority message to Berlin, to Joachim von Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, to Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the head of the RSHA Reich Main Security Office. Berlin's response was immediate: "Buy it, pay him whatever he wants." They gave Bazna a code name Cicero, because, Ambassador von Papen noted, the document spoke with such eloquence. Thus began the most lucrative espionage career of the war. Every week, Bazna met Moises in secret locations: the back of a car, a park bench, a safe house. He handed over rolls of film. Moises handed over bundles of British 5-pound notes. Bazna was becoming a wealthy man. He bought expensive suits. He bought a car. He even kept working as the ambassador's valet, polishing Sir Hugh's shoes in the morning while selling his secrets in the evening. But in Berlin, a strange paralysis was setting in. The intelligence provided by Cicero was arguably the best the Germans received during the entire war. He provided the minutes of the Tehran Conference, where Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill discussed the strategy for the final defeat of Germany. He provided information about Overlord, the code name for the invasion of France. He provided the codes used by the RAF. He provided the timeline for the Soviet winter offensive. By all logic, this intelligence should have allowed Germany to adapt its strategy. It should have allowed them to move divisions, to prepare defenses, to disrupt Allied diplomacy. It did not. Why? Because of the psychology of distrust that permeated the Nazi state. The Third Reich was not a monolithic machine. It was a snake pit of competing bureaucracies. Ribbentrop hated von Papen. Kaltenbrunner hated Schellenberg. Himmler distrusted everyone. When the Cicero documents arrived in Berlin, instead of acting on them, the leaders analyzed them for traps. "It is too good," Kaltenbrunner argued. "How can one valet open a British dispatch box every night? The British are not this incompetent. This is a plant. They are feeding us truth mixed with lies to lead us into a disaster." The shadow of the double-cross system hung over everything. The Germans knew the British had turned German spies in England. They were terrified of being played. Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, was particularly obstinate. He despised von Papen and feared that if Papen achieved a great intelligence coup, he might become a rival for the foreign ministry. So, Ribbentrop downplayed the intelligence. He noted in the margins of the reports, "Interesting, but likely a deception." So the documents sat in safes in Berlin. The generals on the front lines, who desperately needed this information, never saw most of it. But the Germans continued to pay. They paid Cicero hundreds of thousands of pounds. And this is where the story takes its darkest, most ironic turn. Where did this money come from? Germany was running out of foreign currency. They could not simply go to the Bank of England and withdraw cash. The answer lay in Block 18 and 19 of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, just north of Berlin. This was the home of Operation Bernhard. Operation Bernhard was the brainchild of SS Major Bernhard Kruger. It was the largest counterfeiting operation in history. The goal was to destabilize the British economy by flooding the world with fake banknotes. The SS scoured the concentration camps for Jewish prisoners with specific skills. They looked for printers, engravers, artists, paper experts, and bankers. They pulled these men from the gas chambers of Auschwitz and the starvation of Mauthausen. They brought them to Sachsenhausen. They gave them clean clothes, decent food, and beds with sheets. They gave them a radio. They allowed them to grow their hair out. In exchange, these 142 prisoners had to produce the perfect British pound. It was an immense technical challenge. The British white fiver was a masterpiece of Victorian engineering. The paper was made from pure linen rags, not wood pulp. It had a unique texture, a crispness that was hard to replicate. The watermark was complex. The numbering system was a mathematical code. The prisoners of Operation Bernhard solved every problem. They figured out that the British paper was made using dirty rags, not clean ones, which gave it a slightly grayish hue. They replicated the watermark by creating wire meshes of microscopic precision. They broke the algorithm of the serial numbers. By 1943, the prisoners at Sachsenhausen were producing 650,000 banknotes per month. The total face value of the forged notes produced during the war was $134 million. That's equivalent to billions of dollars today. The quality was terrifying. When the SS sent samples to a Swiss bank to be authenticated, the bank confirmed they were genuine. Even the Bank of England, when presented with the best Bernhard forgeries, struggled to tell the difference. This was the money that was sent to Ankara. When Ludwig Moisish handed Elyesa Bazna those thick bundles of cash in the backseat of his car, he was handing him the product of slave labor. He was handing him paper printed by men who were working with a gun to their heads, knowing that once the job was done, they would be executed to keep the secret. Bazna, the greedy valet, thought he was robbing the British Empire. In reality, he was being paid with the blood and sweat of Jewish prisoners. The irony was multifaceted. The Germans didn't trust the intelligence because they thought the British were too smart to be robbed. The British were indeed being robbed, but the Germans weren't using the intel, and the thief was being paid in money that was technically worthless, yet produced with such genius that it passed as real. The climax of the Cicero affair came in early 1944. Bazna had grown bold. He was photographing documents almost every night. He had accumulated 300 Dithlasern. He began to talk about retiring, but the net was closing in. The British intelligence services were not asleep. They knew there was a leak in Ankara. They just didn't know who. In late 1943, an American OSS agent, the precursor to the CIA in Switzerland, was approached by a German defector. The defector worked in the German Foreign Office. He told the Americans, "There is a source in the British embassy in Ankara. He is called Cicero. He is the ambassador's valet." The Americans passed this to the British. The British sent security officers to Ankara to investigate. They installed alarms. They changed the locks. But and this is a testament to the class system of 1940s Britain, they did not immediately suspect the valet. Ambassador Nachbal Hugeson could not believe that his servant, a man who laid out his pajamas and poured his coffee, could be a master spy. It was inconceivable. He suspected his secretaries. He suspected the cipher clerks. He did not look at the invisible man in the room. However, the pressure was mounting. Moisish's secretary, a woman named Nayla Kapp, defected to the British. She knew about Cicero. Bazna realized his time was up. On a morning in April 1944, Elyesa Bazna polished the ambassador's shoes one last time. He laid out the ambassador's suit, and then he simply walked out of the embassy. He took his money. He disappeared into the chaotic streets of Istanbul. He'd gotten away with it. He was the most successful spy of the war. He had stolen the crown jewels of British intelligence. He had survived the suspicion of the Gestapo. He had evaded the MI6 hunters. He was a rich man, or so he thought. The end of the war brought the collapse of the Third Reich. It also brought the end of the deception. After the war, Bazna tried to use his fortune. He emerged in Istanbul as a businessman. He wanted to build a luxury hotel. He partnered with contractors. He produced his bundles of cash to fund the construction. The Turkish banks examined the notes. They sent them to the Bank of England for verification. The reply came back counterfeit. Operation Bernhard. Bazna was stunned. He had risked his life for months. He had betrayed the country that employed him. He had navigated the most dangerous spy game in history, and he had been paid in paper. The Germans had known. Of course, they had known. Moisish knew. Kaltenbrunner knew. They never intended to pay him real money. Why waste hard currency on a spy when you have a basement full of perfect fakes? Bazna was ruined. His assets were seized. He was arrested for passing counterfeit currency, though he eventually avoided a long prison sentence by claiming ignorance. He spent the next decades in poverty. He worked as a night watchman. He tried to sell his story. He wrote a book, I Was Cicero, which was made into a movie starring James Mason. He made a little money from the book, but nothing compared to the fortune he thought he had. He spent years writing letters to the West German government. He argued that since he was a contracted agent of the Third Reich, the successor state of Germany owed him his wages in real money. It was a ludicrous lawsuit, a spy suing for back pay. The West German courts dismissed it. They essentially said, "We are not responsible for the criminal activities of the SS, and we certainly aren't going to exchange counterfeit war money for Deutsche Marks." Elyesa Bazna died in Munich in 1970. He was working as a night watchman at a construction site. He died poor, bitter, and alone. But the story of Cicero is more than just a tragedy of one man's greed. It is a perfect case study in the failure of the Nazi intelligence apparatus. Consider the Overlord documents. In early 1944, Cicero photographed a document that contained the word Overlord in the context of a cross-channel invasion. This was the Holy Grail. If the German High Command had trusted this, they could have focused their defenses. But at the same time, British double agents like Garbo were telling them the invasion would be at Pas de Calais. The Germans had two sources. One was a lying British agent Garbo, whom they trusted. The other was a genuine thief Cicero, whom they distrusted. They believed the liar and ignored the thief. Why? Because Garbo's reports confirmed what they wanted to believe, that the Allies would take the shortest route. Cicero's reports were messy, complicated, and required them to rethink their worldview. Furthermore, the bureaucratic warfare between the RSHA and the Abwehr meant that information was hoarded as political currency rather than used for military advantage. Kaltenbrunner didn't want to share Cicero's intel with the army because he wanted the SS to take credit for the discovery. By the time the information trickled down to the generals, it was diluted with warnings about potential deception. The legacy of Operation Bernhard is equally dark. As the Red Army approached Sachsenhausen in 1945, the SS moved the counterfeiting equipment and the prisoners to Austria. They planned to execute the prisoners at the Ebensee concentration camp, but chaos intervened. The American army was advancing too fast. The SS guards fled. The prisoners were liberated. They were the only reason we know the full story of the money Bazna was paid with. They testified about the printing presses, the paper, the serial numbers. In Lake Toplitz in the Austrian Alps, the retreating SS dumped crates of the fake notes. For years after the war, divers would find bundles of soggy British pounds floating in the freezing water, the remnants of the fortune that was supposed to destroy the British economy. Sir Hugh Knatchbull Hughson, the ambassador whose negligence allowed all this to happen, was quietly reprimanded but not ruined. He ended his career in relative obscurity. The British establishment closed ranks. They admitted the security failure internally, but tried to minimize it publicly. However, the Cicero affair forced a complete overhaul of British diplomatic security. The red box protocols were tightened. The vetting of local staff became draconian. The era of the gentleman diplomat playing piano while his valet wandered the halls was over. In the final analysis, the Cicero affair is a story about the corrosive nature of lies. Bazna lied to the ambassador. The Nazis lied to Bazna about the money. The British lied to the Germans about D-Day. In this wilderness of mirrors, the truth was the only thing that had no value. The documents Cicero stole were true. They were accurate. They were priceless. But because they entered a system built on lies, paranoia, and murder, they became worthless. And the money he received was the physical manifestation of that worthlessness, beautifully crafted, technically perfect, but ultimately just a fraud printed on rag paper by men waiting to die. When you look at the outcome of World War II, you see the triumph of logistics and industrial power. But in the shadows, you see the failure of the Axis intelligence mind. The Allies won not just because they had more tanks, but because they trusted each other. The British shared ultra with the Americans shared magic with the British. They built a unified intelligence picture. The Germans, even when handed the keys to the kingdom by a valet in Ankara, could not bring themselves to turn the lock. They were paralyzed by the very cynicism that defined their regime. They paid for the best intelligence of the war with fake money. And in return, they got nothing but a front-row seat to their own destruction, documented in the secret papers they refused to believe.